So in 2015, I was on social assistance, and I quickly learned that you can't survive off $255 a month. Out of that $255 a month, I had to take $49 out of that to cover the rest of my rent because social assistance only covered $635, and I had to take the remaining amount. So out of that money, I had $56 left for groceries. I had to wash my own clothes. That's for your food, your electricity, that's everything. So when it came to tampons and pads, there was no money for that. I had to rely on my family. My family helped me a lot. I didn't tell anybody, but at the beginning of my cycle, at the end of my cycle, I would use toilet paper to save on the tampons and the pads because I was nervous that I wouldn't have enough. The toilet paper was actually stolen too. A friend of mine from their work gave me a big box of toilet paper. That's something we don't think about either, is the toilet paper, the toothpaste. I couldn't afford anything.
Why was it embarrassing to ask for a tampon or a pad? It's a need, you know. I was
so embarrassed to tell anybody about my situation. When I think about it now, I should have went to the food bank for food. Tea and toast was my meal of choice a lot of times. I did rely heavily on my parents, but I felt bad, so I would tell my parents that I'm good. I don't know what it is. Maybe it was the way I was raised, and maybe it's the type of person I am that I help people rather than ask, but I was embarrassed to ask for help. And when I think about it now, I actually think I probably would go out and steal tampons or pads rather than go ask somebody for help, which is kind of shameful because a lot of other people, when I speak to them, a lot of other people have the same attitude. And I've actually met women that actually go out and steal tampons and pads every month because they can't afford it, and their cycles are heavy and they're going through more pads. This is a real issue, and we need to talk about this.
Why do you think it's so difficult for us to talk about this?
I think maybe it was the way we were raised. It's just like crying. We're not allowed to cry. You had to go to your room to cry. It's not socially acceptable. Maybe because when you think about it, when we talk about our periods, most males, I shouldn't say most males, that's stereotyping, but half the males, I would go with half the males, are uncomfortable right away when you mention the word period. Men don't want to talk about it. It's just not a topic that is not favored by anybody. I don't know. Maybe it is. That is a good question. Maybe it is the way we were raised. Maybe it's the way society has raised us, is that we don't talk about our periods.
For sure. So we don't talk about it, and there's no funding for it. So tell me about, fast forward to what's going on now. How did you get involved in the bill?
I'm really vocal on Twitter. And I've noticed that a lot of people are embarrassed to talk about their story, so I keep telling my story, and then when I hear other stories, I tell them as well. And Gail, we met through Twitter. She's a kind of behind-the-scenes kind of girl, so she took my story and she asked Carla if we could speak. So we sat with Carla, and I explained to her. I showed her my budget, and I explained to her, we shouldn't be having these conversations. I shouldn't have to embarrass myself. This is a basic right. Women bleed once a month, every month, and it's not new. We've had our periods since the beginning of time. We shouldn't be embarrassed to talk about this, and we shouldn't have to be stealing. We shouldn't have to be begging for tampons or pads. It's a basic right. And when I spoke to Carla, right away she could relate to having periods. She could relate to having a bad period, and she agreed with us that it is a basic right, and she said that she would fight for us.
Does it ever surprise you that it's not part of an allowance now?
It blows my mind that it's not. This is the year 2019, and women in Nova Scotia, Canada, hundreds of women in Nova Scotia, Canada, cannot afford tampons or pads. I have one word for our government, and that's criminal. We can't allow people to live like this just because they're embarrassed to talk. We know this is happening. Just because they're embarrassed to talk about it, does that mean that we're going to let them live that way? It's like a lady that I spoke to one time. She had a stuttering issue, and she was afraid to speak up because she stuttered. I said, does this lady have to suffer because she's stuttering? No. Now we know the issue. We should fix it. We should stop talking about it. most of the politicians, they always say, I feel sorry for you, I'm trying to understand your situation. We don't need empathy. We need things changed. This is our basic rights. This is common sense. Women have periods once a month and they need tampons and pads.